Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the second live talk by the Oxford University Italian Society. Today, we have the honor to have former member of the European Parliament and human rights activist, Mr. Marco Cappato. Good morning, Mr. Cappato.
Good morning to you all. Ciao.
Marco Cappato was an Italian member of the European Parliament from 1999 to 2009. Under that role, he was also a member of the Foreign Affairs, the Civil Liberties, and Human Rights Committees. He also served as the European Parliament Rapporteur on the human rights in the world for 2007. Since then, he has been a nonviolent activist for fundamental rights and liberties. Crucially, in 2017, he undertook a civic disobedience to push the national parliament approve new rules allowing legal euthanasia in Italy. This morning, after a brief speech titled Science as a Human Right, a Dream or Reality by Mr. Cappato, we will have 10 to 15 minutes questions by the committee, followed by questions from you, our audience. So please feel free to leave your questions below, and I will be very happy to read them to Mr. Cappato. Until then, Mr. Cappato, the stage is yours. You may begin.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was trying to share on my Facebook, and I will do it while speaking. So for the first part of for the next seconds, I will be engaged in this activity, so that to enlarge our audience. So, good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an honor to me to speak with you today. My English, as you can hear, is far from perfect, so I beg your indulgence on this. I proposed to the organizer the possibility of speaking about the right science as a human right, because it is at the center of my activity, and also because I think it's crucial nowadays for the present and future of politics and democracy, and also during this COVID-19 crisis. This crisis has put science at the center of the stage in global politics. But in a way, it was already like that. If you think about climate change or issues like genome editing, artificial intelligence, all these are issues in which there are very heavy social and economic consequences that are stemming from the result of science. And we could, in a way, say that power nowadays is where science and technologies are. It is a matter of fact. In other period of history, I don't know, the army and the military were at the center of the state. Nowadays, science and technology are really the place in which the power of the decisions that are most crucial for our daily life are taken. So, if we are interested, and I am interested in the future of liberal democracy, I think we have to concentrate and to look at the ability of democracy and the rule of law to make science benefit to the people. Because if our democracy would fail on that, other systems and other models of handling the power will prevail. And this is what brings us to the concept and the idea of right to science. That is not my idea. It's something that is already existent since almost 50 years, because it is included in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So I take a few minutes on the legal aspect of that, because during that convention, in in the framework of that convention, Article 15 states that and recognize the right of everyone to, among other things, to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its application. I would like to concentrate on that point because it's very important. It means that everyone in the world is entitled to the right to, I repeat that, enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications as a human right. So exactly at the same level of the right of not being tortured or being jailed without a trial. We could in a way say that the traditional body of human rights that was built on the physical right of anyone of not being violated in its integrity as a physical body, this right to science transpose it and enlarge this concept to the idea of knowledge, the right to knowledge, to benefit, to enjoy the benefit from scientific progress and its application. In this convention of 50 years ago, it's foreseen also the right to the conservation, development, and diffusion of science and culture. Diffusion of science. Let's think about how is important today with the coronavirus study and research, how is important to share and to spread the information among the laboratories around the world. The right also to undertake, to respect the freedom indispensable for scientific research and creative activity. So let's imagine those regulations that without good motivation are prohibiting science. In Italy, for example, scientific research that is perfectly legal in the UK, like the research on human embryos, is completely forbidden, is prohibited. So researchers that could win the Nobel Prize tomorrow on the genome editing and the CRISPR techniques, in Italy, those scientists would be jailed. So the freedom indispensable to scientific research. And the state party to the covenant of economic, social, and cultural rights recognize the benefits to be derived from the encouragement and development of international contacts and cooperation in the scientific and cultural fields. Today, on Monday, May the 3rd, a huge meeting organized by the European Commission is a pledging meeting, international meeting, in which the European Union, some governments like Norway, Italy, and others, and the World Health Organization are launching a global fund and campaign to raise 7.5 billion euros in order to research for a vaccine on coronavirus. So I make this as example of today just to state how important it is that this right that is in a way sleeping there since 50 years, nowadays we should make it wake up and be concretely applied. 1 month ago, the United Nations approved a document, it's so-called general comment, in order to give a concrete application of this right to science. So from now on, the right to science will be at least monitored as a first step in order to obtain that it will be enforced when member states are not respecting it. I made two concrete examples, genome editing and artificial intelligence. How important would be today that genome editing would benefit to everybody, because if it will not happen, we risk to go toward a society in which a part of a society will be genetically improved, edited in the meaning of improved, and for those people who cannot allow for themselves this kind of a future medical improvement, they will not. So we risk to have huge inequalities if the right to science will not be applied. Artificial intelligence is another example. Artificial intelligence nowadays, the research is for the benefit of companies that want to sell goods to us in a ever more precise and personalized way. Either is for state, for national states that are trying to control or even to censor and manipulate our life. But there is no public investment for artificial intelligence directly benefit the citizens to empower them in their relationship with companies and with the state. So around this right to science, we organized international event. The last was in February, the World Congress for Freedom of Scientific Research in Addis Ababa, with the African Union and UNESCO. And of course, Africa is a crucial place in which advocating for the right to science in order not to marginalize that continent in the process of scientific research and advancement. But also for Italy, this is very important because Italy nowadays is below half of the EU threshold of investment on scientific research compared to the GDP. The European Union objective is 3% of GDP on scientific research. Italy is below half of it, is 1.3%. China is more than 4%. China risks to win the race for global clout on scientific research. Why I'm saying risk? Because I believe that it would be very dangerous if an autocratic regime would end up to imposing itself in the global arena as the most performing political model. This would be very, very dangerous. There is also another link between science and democracy, which comes evident when we consider democracy as a technique to take better decisions through a wide consensus. If you consider it democracy as a technique, we should also discuss about democratic innovation. So, for example, how the digital tools could help the activation of democracy. In these weeks, everybody is talking about smart working and about how our activities can be done like we are doing now, staying home. But it's unbelievable how in Italy, for example, nothing which has to do something with democracy can be done by home, staying home through digital and through digital tools to the internet. In Europe, and I'm stopping with this, there is the possibility of activating the initiative of the European Commission, collecting 1 million signatures on a proposal. Now, currently, we are collecting signatures on the campaign stopglobalwarming.eu. So on this website, we are trying to collect 1 million signatures in order to fight climate change through a carbon price system, a carbon pricing system, which is a proposal taken from 27 Nobel laureates to shift the fiscal burden from labor to the environment to CO2 emission. So this is another example of how science, democracy, and technology should be allied in order to solve our future problem. But in order to do that, we need political decision. It's not something that is happening like that by itself. By itself is most likely that autocratic regime or dictatorship would solve the thing in a faster and even more effective way, at least in the short run. I stop it here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cappato. That was very interesting to hear from you and to have this holistic approach to the role of science in democracy, but also to improve the standard livings of many people. The first question that I would like to ask you is that you have been very active to fight climate change for several years. Recently, you have introduced with other prominent politicians the Stop Global Warming online movement that you were mentioning in your talk. I would like to ask you, what do you think has been working during this battle, and what do you think has not been working, and why?
Well, until 2-3 months ago, so before the COVID crisis, the success, the new positive things that was going around Europe was not just Europe, but in the world, thanks also to Greta Thunberg, to the mobilization, Fridays for Future, and so on. Climate change jumped at the top of the agenda. The new European Commission, for example, with President von der Leyen, put climate change at the top of the agenda. Still without very clear proposal on how to deal with that, but at least the issue was no longer a marginal technical debate, but at the core of the political stage. What was already the weak point was the proposal point of view, because indeed even the Fridays for Future movement, in my opinion, was yes, with the proposal of listening to scientists, but what we should do, what we could do. So this is the weak part of the global movement created around climate change issue. And this is exactly the reason why we took this proposal from this panel of Nobel laureates and we transformed it in a political proposal. So to create a minimal level of pricing for CO2 emission in Europe, and of course to diminish taxes on labor in order to not to increase the global level of taxation. So the problem now is that the whole world is, of course, and rightly so, is dealing with the coronavirus and with the oil prices at their historical minimum. There is a concrete risk that in order to have a quick recovery from the economic point of view and from employment point of view, political decision makers will dismiss the urgency of tackling climate change. I think it would be a mistake, not only because in the long run climate change could be even more dangerous, even on the medium run, than coronavirus, but also because this crisis is also an occasion. We are going to spend thousands of billions of euros of public money to let the economy recover. This is why it's so important that that money would be spent also with in mind in our mind, criteria for sustainable development, not just recovery at any cost. And these two things could be allied in a longer-term quality of our economic system. So I invite and urge all of you to sign on stopglobalwarming.eu and to participate to the campaign.
Thank you very much. Another important initiative that you have been working on is Act for Our Rights. I think it is crucial nowadays, and it was something that you were mentioning in your talk earlier on. This movement is an initiative that wants to develop an objective mechanism to hold national governments accountable for ensuring the rule of law across the EU. So my question is, how do you think technology will shape political engagement, and how can students be part of that?
The first way of improving political engagement is to allow what is already allowed, also through digital tools and system. For example, in Italy, you can propose referendum or legislative initiative, popular initiative, or this kind of system, even at the municipality level, should be made activable also through the internet. This is very simple, technologically speaking, and it should be done because we cannot accept anymore that the only way of doing, let's put it in another way, democracy has remained the last important human activity that you cannot make with your smartphone. You can do everything with your smartphone. You can buy everything. You can receive any service. But because of the fact that democracy does not profit anyone in the short run from the economic point of view, there is no serious investment on how technology could improve the political activity in general, democracy and so on. And also we should think about innovation, new form of technology, of democratic interaction. For example, in Ireland, citizen assemblies with the citizen elected by sortition, where the tool, the path which succeeded in having referendum on abortion and same-sex marriage. And this was the consequence of an innovation of the democratic process, including people that until that moment did not feel themselves involved by the democratic debate and public institution life. So this is very important, and the initiative that you mentioned put a lot of importance to the European Union in order to enforce the respect of the rule of law. If you think about the fact that on the economic parameters, the European Commission is intervening in a steady way, in a structural way, to monitor if member states are respecting the economic parameter of the European Union. Nothing of similar is existing about human rights, civil political rights, and the rule of law. There is no permanent monitoring of what member states are doing, the condition of the justice system, the information system, the jail system. I think it is not acceptable to have a European Union active only for the respect of economic parameters and not for the respect of democratic and the rule of law parameters.
Thank you very much. For Another question that I have is the importance of artificial intelligence nowadays. One of your proposals was to allow people who died to donate their data to the state, and that would help not only for health reasons but also for to compete where in a market that, as you said, is dominated by companies. So my question is, what do you think would be the future of artificial intelligence in light of privacy rights issues?
Well, first of all, the idea of the donation of our data after our death, I took from Luciano Floridi, which I think is who I think is a professor in Oxford University, if I'm not wrong, but is a very famous philosopher. And well, I think that from artificial intelligence, we could draw two very different perspectives. There is a very dystopian scenario, which is that artificial intelligence at the end will concentrate an enormous amount of power on some big players from the private sector and from state, and the citizens will find powerless in front of that. Because when you have companies, and it is already the case, companies that on some issue know, they are knowing ourselves better than ourselves, because it's already well known that Facebook and Google, for example, have the capability of storing and treating an enormous amount of information on a specific individual, more and so to know or to predict our choice better than we could do, and we are at the very beginning of this technology. So let's imagine how powerful this can become, and how worrying it would become if those companies are working in alliance with the state power. And if the state power is not a democratic power, the dystopian scenario can lead us to a very bad and negative situation, also for privacy, but also for democracy, because at the end, if the power knows better than myself what my decision could be, my choices could be, there is a possibility of manipulation of citizens that would render democracy completely useless. There is a positive scenario of artificial intelligence and digital technologies empowering the citizen, allowing me to control the power, to have, with the help of some organizations, NGOs, civil society group, party, movement, and so on, a power which is completely, in a way, public, clear in its dynamic and in its decision, and the citizens can make people in power accountable for what they are doing. Or these two scenarios is, I don't think it's a problem of making a forecast. It's a political choice, as I said before. If we want that artificial intelligence and new technology are going in the direction of empowering the citizens, we need to build this scenario through regulation and investments. It will not happen by itself. It needs political will. We created, as Associazione Luca Coscioni, a sample of artificial intelligence for activating and respecting civil rights. You will find it in the website cheatbot.et, cheatbot as with an I, CITBOT.IT. It's really a prototype just to explain how artificial intelligence could be used for to activate our civil right, but this should be done at the institutional level.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cappato. That was the end of questions from me at the committee. Now we leave the stage for our audience to ask questions, so please feel free to leave comments below. During the week, we have gathered a few questions from our members, but I will be very happy to read questions, so please leave them below. The first question that comes to us is from Anna Clemente, who's a master's student here at Oxford. She asks, in your opinion, why don't we have a competitive Green Party in Italy?
Well, at the end, when the Five Stars movement was born, I think it's more than 10 years ago, there was a strong environmental focus, and also regarding local environmental issues. So in a way, this huge increase in consensus for environmentalist parties around Europe in Italy was almost, I mean, at least in part, drained by the Five Stars movement. Then, well, I don't want to tackle a more like polemic or political level. I think that it remained most of it remained verbal. In countries like Germany or in Northern Europe, one of the characteristics that made environment a long-term issue in the political arena was pragmatism. In Italy, in a way, the experience of the Greens, more in the past than now, was completely linked to the left, side of the political spectrum. In other parts of Europe, even when Green parties are identified with the left or as a progressive parties, but they are also recognized as pragmatists. So at the municipal level, if you believe, I don't know, I make an example like investing in the bicycle system, you can do it if you are an administration, a municipality on the left or on the right. It doesn't matter that much. So this more pragmatic and less ideological way of applying environmentalism, I think, has favored, I don't know if you say favored, has promoted, helped the growth, the electoral growth of Green parties around Europe.
Thank you very much indeed. The second question comes from Piero Alberti, who's a medical student here at Oxford. He asks, how much do we know about the impact the coronavirus crisis is having on more socially vulnerable groups, in particular migrants and prison inmates?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not in the position of giving a complete and appropriate answer. I see there are starting to be published. I saw something yesterday on Nature, but scientific review are starting to publish research on that aspect of the also psychological and social effect of coronavirus that are less evident than economic effects or epidemiological effects, but they risk to have an impact, a tremendous impact on our society. I know example like the island of Lesbos in Greece, where any kind of social distancing is by itself impossible. In Italian prisons, I don't know the situation around Europe, but in Italian prisons, social distancing is impossible because prisons are overcrowded. There was not a serious policy of decarcerating, for example, for people that will be already freed in the coming month, to decarcerate them, to free them few months before, in order to diminish the pressure on the overcrowding prison. So there are not figures, data of systematic studies, but it is sure already that coronavirus are beating more hardly the marginalized niche of our society. I saw a study, for example, in the United States, Black communities are already suffering and paying a higher increase of contagion and death than white community. And this, of course, is a proxy. You can be an African American and be well educated and rich, but it is a proxy of the fact that disadvantaged community from a cultural or economic point of view are beaten more hardly by the virus.
Thank you very much indeed. The following question comes from Sara Carrino, who's a master's student at the University of Bologna. What are the future prospects regarding the genome editing and the use of embryonic stem cells for neurodegenerative diseases?
Well, I was telling you before this idea of the right to science and important to having it recognized by the United Nations and all the national states. And a couple of years ago, we organized, we as a Science for Democracy and Associazione Luca Coscioni, we organized a conference in Geneva at the UN, at the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, exactly on this point. We brought scientists from around Europe in order to explain to diplomats how important it is to let science and research go on those aspects. I make you just an example. I'm not a scientist, so I give you a political answer. One of the speakers in that occasion was Malin Parma from Lund University in Sweden. Malin Parma and her group is the most advanced laboratory and research group in the world about Parkinson's disease. They use human embryos, stem cells derived, because, well, for scientific characteristics of those cells are better than adult cells for scientific research. So Malin Parma is studying to find a cure against Parkinson's disease. If Malin Parma tomorrow would open a lab in Milano, where I live, doing exactly the same thing, she could be arrested up to 3 years in prison, I think, and 150,000 euros of fine. So the matter of fact is that this kind of research is tremendously important, and those countries like Italy that are prohibiting this research are posing an obstacle to finding the cure. And I think also we are as Italy, violating the right to science on that aspect.
Thank you very much. This question comes from Professor Elena Draghici Vasilescu, who's a professor in philosophical theology and art in Byzantium at the University of Oxford. She asks, is the problem of human rights still a problem in Western Europe today?
Well, I think that it should be, and not just in Western in Western Europe. It should be at the basis of our society, and in fact, there is now a new situation. I don't want to politicize too much my answer, but I think that there was a process started with the Iraqi World War II of general losing of appeal, of attraction for the rule of law, human rights based model around the world. In a way, the so-called democratic West lost credibility faced to the global public opinion. The presidency of Donald Trump in the United States accelerated and worsened this process because Donald Trump is very explicit in saying, for me, geopolitical discussion are about power, are a game of power. So for me to deal with a democracy or an authoritarian state, it doesn't matter. The only thing which does matter is the interest of my country. And this is a very bad element for those who believe that still democracy, rule of law, and human rights should at the basis of geopolitics and foreign affairs and also internal politics. So yes, human rights are in danger also within the European Union. Nationalism is nowadays is a strong enemy of having a supranational or having supranational institutions, court, agency, which can intervene to sanction member states which are violating human rights. So I think this is why we need the European Union, and we did a reform of the European Union in order to make the European Union taking the lead of international cooperation. And this COVID-19 crisis, in a way, is an occasion to do that, because China is playing its nationalist agenda. Russia is playing its nationalist agenda, and both are trying to manipulate public opinion at the global level. Donald Trump announced to cut the intention of cutting the funds for the World Health Organization. So either the European Union member states are able to react in a united manner and to take the lead of a new globalism based on democracy and the rule of law, either we risk to enter, we already entered in a way, but to go deeper and deeper in authoritarian involution, which is touching also our so-called democracy, because democracy is never perfect and is never it could never taken for granted. This is my answer on that.
Thank you very much. We have two more questions from our audience. And they all go back to domestic politics. The first one is from an anonymous who sent us a message on the form that we provided. He asks, or she asks, on the 2nd of May, Marco Pannella would have celebrated his 19th birthday. He has worked on issues like the right to divorce, the right to abortion, the legalization of cannabis, and the definitive abolition of nuclear power. The question is, do you see another Marco Pannella in today's politics? And who is him or her?
The brief answer is no, because well, I spent a good part of my life working and living and sharing many things with Marco, and his singularity was such that I could not think of anybody replicating what he did and what he was. So I just think that some of his ideas are more, let's say, applicable and updated now than when he launched them. This was one of the problems of Marco Pannella, because I remember, for example, 10 years ago, nobody was talking about fake news. No, fake news is a term that we are using since a couple of years, 2-3 years. And Marco Pannella was insisting on the idea that we should create and recognize a kind of right to knowledge or right to the truth. So a public investment and engagement to guarantee for the citizen the right to receive accurate information on what's going on. And we were saying, okay, Marco, yes, this sounds very good, but how can we do this in practice? So we, as Radical, also were skeptical of this idea, and nowadays is something that everybody is talking about. How can we fight against fake news? Science, of course, is a part of the solution. Is not the whole solution, but the scientific method is the only method that we know in order to try to separate the truth and manipulation. And of course, scientific truth is not a truth for the eternity. It can be put under discussion through different scientific research, so the so-called peer review or new experiment and so on. So there is no a truth with a big T. The truth is always something that we have to research about and look for. But I think so. I made this example just to say that no, there is not, and there will not be another Marco Pannella, but some of his ideas can be continued in a very practical way through political campaigning and fights.
Thank you very much. The final question that we received from our audience is by Francesco Galvanetto, who's an undergraduate student here at Oxford. He asks, what do you think about the alleged coalition between More Europe or Più Europa, Azione and Italia Viva? Would that be possible?
Well, yes, possible. The simple answer is yes. Would that be useful? I also think, personally speaking, since 1 year, I'm working on a different project, a non-electoral project, which doesn't mean that I'm not interested in electoral politics, but I think that one of the obstacles to have a common and democratic European Union is exactly made by national parties. Because even when they are pro-European, like the parties that you mentioned, that you have mentioned, Più Europa, Azione, and other, Italia Viva. In a way, also Partito Democratico can be recognized as a pro-European party. But at the end, elections are always national. There is no incentive for electoral politics to think about the long term and to create activity directly addressed to the European citizens. This is why I think we need also, I'm not saying instead of or against, but also civic pan-European movement, which are political but non-electoral. So the movement that are not concentrated to the electoral result, to electing people in the institution, in the national institution, but they are interested in building pan-European civic campaigns. This is why we created the movement Humans, EUMANS, the spelling is EU, months, in order to build and to create political campaign at the pan-European level. One of that campaign I mentioned before, we discussed it already, is the stopglobalwarming.eu campaign. So 1 million signatures to be collected by July 20 in order to push the European Commission to decide on European carbon pricing, and also other campaign that we are running now. So I think that a European coordination or coalition or unification of pro-European political electoral forces in Italy would be useful. I also think it would not be enough to push the needed reform of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cappato. We are running out of time, so I would like to say thank you very much for your interesting and thoughtful insights and for answering our questions this morning. Thank you very much. And
I thank you. I thank you all and everybody, each and everyone who followed this broadcast, in a way, this meeting, this webinar. I allow myself to, I take the liberty of saying that you have a huge responsibility, because today everybody is talking about the elite and the people, the elite and the people. And now there is this idea that there is a fight among the elite and the people. Democracy is exactly about reconciling the two things. So being an elite is an objective fact, because you study more, you know more, you have more competence, and then you become elite. So it's very important that I think is my suggestion or invitation, that you leave a space, not a huge space, but a space of your daily engagement, and also to let's call it a democratic participation on what you believe is important. I tried to explain today what I think is important, but you can have ideas which are the opposite of mine, but still it's very important to dedicate a part of your life, of your time, to let's say the community, the public opinion, the democratic initiative and participation. So thank you very much for this occasion, and I hope that with some of you and some of you that will be interested, we can keep in touch and do things together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cappato. I hope as well that soon we will be able to invite you to Oxford and have a talk in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward. Ciao.
Thank you. Goodbye. Finally, I would like to say thanks to the following people who have helped me to organize this event. First, Emma Baldassarri and Fabio Spagliardi, our secretary and IT officers at the Oxford University Italian Society. Also, James Mascia, Giorgia Ramazzotti, and Cecilia Corsini, our press officers. And finally, our sponsors for allowing us to continue our activities, in particular Banca Intesa and Bibuona. I would also like to say thank you all for joining us this morning, and I hope to see you for our next events. If you liked our content and would like to stay updated about our next events, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Until then, thank you very much and goodbye.